I'll tell you a story. I would like you to imagine that you are driving along the road in the city. Now, this actually happened in Berlin. This is a true story. Berlin being the capital of Germany. Traffic lights, you know what cities are like. You're driving a car down the road. In front of you, a motorbike had an accident, came off his bike, lying on the footpath, and there is this guy lying on the footpath. What would you do if you're driving along the road or walking along? Walking along the footpath, and there is this guy lying there, not moving. Really did happen. He lay there for 15 minutes with the traffic going past, people stepping around him, till one driver who stopped at there's a stoplight and the traffic backed up, and there's this guy, wound down the window and he said, "Can I phone someone for you?" 15 minutes. Unbeknownst to the people, they were all being videoed. It was all on tape. There it was. And it came on the telly that night. How would you feel if you'd been one of the ones walking past? Would you make excuses? Oh, I was in too big a hurry, the lights were going to change. I had to get to work. Every one of those drivers, by law, has to have a first aid certificate as part of their licence in Germany. Every one of them. Laden said to me, "Make it personal." Make it personal. That didn't happen to me. But 2 months ago, I was coming down 16th Street, travelling towards my place, and came to the main highway there on 15th Street, Third Highway. And someone did a silly thing and did a right-hand turn when they shouldn't have. And there was a minor prang there on the corner of 16th, just down from the school. And I looked around and I kept driving. I should have got out and walked back to see if they were all right. I said, "Oh, someone else will do it. Someone else will do it." Someone else will do it. There's some little technical things that I'd like to bring to your notice this morning. I had not heard of this word. Amygdala. Now, you've all got one. Every one of us have got one. Amygdala. Amygdala? I'm not sure. Amygdala. It's Greek. It's Greek. It's the word that they call for almonds, I think. And it's been changed a bit and put into the Latin, and now we've got this word amygdala. And we've all got one. We really have. And I tell you where. It hides up under your brain, sitting on the brain stem. And humans are the ones that have got them. Humans. Animals, not so active, if they do have one at all. It has much to do. It controls your emotional response, the fight or flight mechanism. It controls dopamine release. It's implicated in learning, stimuli and reward, human behaviour, and communication. Now, if all of us have got one, and it's to do with communication, it's vital that we don't spoil it. If you come across a person you've never met before, and you look at their face, what in their face tells you whether they're someone you can talk to, or someone that turns off, or you leave me alone, or what is it? It's their expressions and their eyes. One of my relatives that has since died, before Liz and I went to visit Scotland about 20 years ago, he said to me, whatever you do, when you're on the London tube, do not make eye contact. Don't look at their faces. And most of the people on that train did not make eye contact, even though I looked around for them, except one. And I looked at this young lady, and she looked at me. She could see that maybe she saw I was jet-lagged. I just got off the plane. I think she recognised that I was an Aussie. And she looked at me and I looked at her, and there was something that went between us. Some little something. Half a grin. Our eyes are the windows to our soul. And if we wish to make an impact on people and communicate with them, take off the shades for a start. Take off. How do you feel when someone's got dark glasses on and you want to go and talk to them? Difficult. Make eye contact. Now, Malavan said last week, we've got to be up and about, busy, sharing what we know about God. Did you know, I don't know whether to tell you this or not, there's a word called dialogical. Now, whether it's a made-up word, I'm not sure. Dialogical means a joining up, I think, of two words, dialogue and logic. Makes sense. Dialogue. What's dialogue? Sharing. Did God share with humans? What was his habit at the very beginning? In the garden. What did he do in the evening? Come and talk. Share. Talk. Share. What happened today? How do we go with our neighbours? How do we go with our workmates? Do we talk and share? How do we go with our family members, our spouses, guys, gentlemen? How often are we opening our hearts? I speak for myself. to our wife. Guys are not really good at sharing feelings. And most women crave that intimacy of sharing feelings. We'll talk about the weather. We'll talk about Joe Blow. We'll talk about whatever. But share your feelings? No. We're a bit shy on doing that. And our relationship wither and starve and more difficult. Guys find that hard. I do. But God is dialogical. That means he communicates. And we get to know each other by spending time and communicating with each other. How do we share our knowledge of God's grace? What's some of the things that God's famous for? His love, yes. Grace. His compassion. His forgiveness. Yeah? And lots more. How do we share meaningfully those attributes? First of all, we've got to know about them ourselves. Has God been gracious to you? He's certainly been gracious to me. Has he forgiven you? Have you asked him to? Not one of us, not one, is perfect enough to say, I don't need any forgiveness. All of us, every last one of us. The Bible says what? All have sinned and fallen short. Fallen short. There's two kinds. An active sin or a passive sin, where you didn't do what you should have done. Falling short. Every one of us. We're all in the same boat. And if it weren't for God and what he had done for us, I've got time to tell you a little story. Some of you are readers. Some of you have got time enough. I know I've found more time to read since I retired. Old habits die hard. This time I'll let it go. Could you please raise your hand if you have heard of a man by the name of Philip Yancey? Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Philip Yancey grew up in the southern part of America where the church he attended was racist to the core. They really gave the dark-skinned African people curry a hard time. They were racist, prejudiced. It was tough for them. And some parts are still tough in America. But back in those days, it would have been 50 years ago, he grew up in this church and it was racist to the core. And I can gladly say that not many of us are afflicted with that in this church. But that was his background. He grew up that way, and eventually, as he became a teenager, he got so fed up with church that he left, went to university and became a journalist. Now, a journalist is someone who is very good with words. He had given up. He was almost an atheist. He would have been an agnostic at that stage. He didn't have much to do with God at all. And when he'd finished his journalist job, someone gave him the job of researching and making an article for the newspaper that he was working for to a Dr. Brand. What was his name? Brand. What's his first name? I can't remember. Never mind. Dr. Brand. This doctor was a specialist dealing with leprosy in India. Leprosy is not a very nice disease. We don't have it in Australia. It's in parts of India, parts of New Guinea even, big New Guinea, the islands. I remember I found a leprous student of mine on the island of Bougainville. It's still around. And leprosy is a bad disease because your nerves go off. You don't feel things. And you bang your foot and you don't feel it. And eventually it gets an ulcer and drops off. Your toes go and then you might lose your whole foot. And this Dr. Brand had given his life to help people over the leprosy. And Philip Yancey was given the task of learning about Dr. Brand. And he spent a lot of time with him and saw how he ministered to those poor people. And he would do surgical reconstruction on their hands and their feet and made their lives more bearable. For years, Philip looked at the work of this guy and got to know him very well. The gracious way that he gave his life to unfortunate people really moved Philip, and he gave his life completely to the Lord, and he's written so many interesting books. If you haven't found him and read some of his books, it really is. I'll give you just the tiniest little sample. If you'll pardon me while I boot this thing up. And get it to work where I want it to get. These things are wonderful. By the way, I'd like to tell you about some of these little things in a minute. This is Philip Yancey being interviewed, and someone asked him this question: what happened recently that led you to laugh out loud at God's grace? Have you found something that God has done that you've noticed that caused you to chuckle? This is what Philip answered. I met my friend Tom, who I hadn't seen for 15 years. He was a hard-drinking, lovable party-goer who stopped going to church after college. Last year, his live-in girlfriend decided she wanted to go to church because of some crisis that she was going through. Tom reluctantly agreed. That morning he sat down and started playing his guitar. Thinking of church, he resurrected 3 hymns from his distant memory. Those are beautiful. What music is that? The girlfriend asked him. Tom explained that they were the words from a hymn. They chose a church out of the phone book. And to Tom's astonishment, that Sunday the congregation sang all 3 of those hymns. It so rattled Tom that he completely turned his life around. He couldn't, isn't that wonderful? It really is. Listening to tell him the story, I couldn't help but laugh. God's got a sense of humour. He really has. We live in a world that's quite different to what it was when many of us were born, especially me. We've all got one of these little things in our pockets. Very powerful little computers. They really are. Very helpful. Exceedingly useful. Yep, they really are. But have you seen someone walking along the street Have you? You would have. Have you seen the people in Melbourne commuting to work with things in their ears and their phones in their pockets? And Are they communicating with anyone near them? No way. They're in their own little world. And into that society of, I hesitate to call them zombies, but that's the way we're heading. Insulated from those near you. Our kids glued to their television or a screen, sending their brains wrong really is. Little kids spending 3 hours a day, under the age of 2, babysat by their computers and their televisions. It fries their brains. I'm speaking from a teaching point of view. You ask the teachers around the place and they will. I don't think it's got any better since I stopped. So how do we as Christians break with grace into that? First of all, we've got to make friends with Jesus ourselves and share that. Share what we know. Tell the stories, because that's what happened to me. It's believable. Don't make it up. It's not believable. If someone's telling you a story and it's a made-up yarn, or he's a habitual liar like some of our major leaders in this world, no one believes them. You've got to tell the truth, the grace, the forgiveness that God has given you. It's not that hard. Not that hard. Is it important? Is this world getting any better? Is it getting worse? You bet. You know, just this last few, maybe 2 months, we've been hit with a crisis in this world that is quite disruptive. The stock market's going down. It's lost, 10 or 12% last week. People are dying. People that catch that, 3% of them will die. And there's 80,000 at the moment. It's a lot of people. And the world is struggling to put a stop to it. I can't help be reminded of what happened when sin came into this world. It spreads. You can't stop it. And it took the death of the Son of God to solve that problem. Do you know about that? Have you read about that? Does it mean anything to you? It's not our houses, it's not our cars, it's not how much money we've got. That doesn't matter that much. It's all about our connection with Jesus, his forgiveness, his grace, and his love.